Okay, so today there's actually quite a bit of opportunities to earn bonus points. We are moving into the promotion side of ethics. And so this is one of the areas that everybody thinks of as being marketing. So there are parts of marketing that people don't think of as being marketing, like logistics, that started in the marketing field. And a lot of logistics programs are now sort of becoming their own department in academic colleges of business. But historically speaking, logistics, which is the place part, which we'll talk about, in another lecture, is not what people thought about as being marketing. The first sort of marketing studies and the earliest marketing studies were these studies on how do we get products, particularly those that are highly perishable, to consumers in the most efficient manner. And nobody thinks of that as being marketing, but it is. So marketing as an academic discipline was really born out of, first of all, this need to get product to consumers, and how do we do that? And then the second part of it became consumer behavior. So we organized the discipline of marketing around the 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion. Place being sort of the oldest sort of academic part. Promotion is the part that everybody thinks of as being marketing. If you have no other exposure to marketing from a formal sense, it's the one that everybody understands advertising, because we're constantly exposed to advertising on a daily basis. We are bombarded with ads, whether we like it or not. Now we do things to try and get around that, like watching programs that we can fast forward, or we can skip the ads. Paying for YouTube, for example, one of my friends pays not for the YouTube television or YouTube TV, but he pays for YouTube Plus or something, so that you don't get the ads in the regular content of YouTube. And I've noticed that when I started my YouTube channel, I clicked deliberately, like I didn't want to monetize the channel, so there were no ads on mine. I have now gone through and watched some of my YouTube videos, so that when I come up with tests, I actually go back and watch them. And I've noticed that they've started putting ads in mine, and I have to contact YouTube about, like, okay, where's my vast sums of money that you owe me for people watching the ads in my YouTube channel, because you've obviously done something, and it's now doing what I didn't want, which was to monetize the channel. So with regard to promotion, there are lots of opportunities for ethical violations or ethical problematic behavior, more so than maybe in some of the other issues, because, and these are probably the ones that are more obvious, because we are dealing with influencing people and the ability to influence people. And so one of the things that I want to do in here is I want to talk about how we can actually influence people and what the ethical implications of that are. And so in order to do that, and one of the things that I think we should think about and then we're going to look at ads as well, is how can we influence people? How can we know what people are interested in, and what kinds of persuasion is going to be attractive to them? And so I'm going to focus in on 2 things in this lecture, and then next time we'll look at some ads probably and talk about what kind of persuasion appeals you're seeing in those ads, and whether or not those kinds of ads are ethical. So the 2 things that I want to focus in on today in talking about promotion are social styles and the VALS insights. So it's strategic business insight, VALS typology. So how many of you are sales students? All right, so you all are familiar, those of you that are sales students, with the social styles, right? We talk a lot about social styles in the sales classes, so that you understand what it is that you're facing in terms of figuring out how to make a persuasive pitch to a prospect, right? And so we focus in a lot of that. So social styles are something that you should be familiar with. What I want to do is I want to combine that then with the VALS types. So social styles are going to tell you how to talk to your prospect or how to make an appeal. That's if we're talking about ads to certain types of groups of individuals. And then Strategic Business Insights VALS types, which stands for values, attitudes, lifestyles, is going to tell them what those people are interested in. So how are we going to communicate to them? And then what would be of interest to various types of people based on when we find a target market, for example, who do we think that that is going to appeal to? So one of the things that I want you to think about and start thinking about it right now, because this is where you're going to get lots of opportunities for bonus points, are restaurants. These are things that everyone in this classroom has experience with, and a lot of you have experience in it, not just from the standpoint of having gone to restaurants, but one of the number one jobs for college students historically has been working in restaurants, right? I mean, almost everybody at some point in time, unless you're, come from an enormously wealthy family, has probably worked in a restaurant, right? I mean, I've worked in restaurants. I own a restaurant. So it's one of the, it's the Stone Line Inn. It's the Stone Line Inn. So we have a restaurant with the bed and breakfast. So it's something that you can understand. So I want to figure out what kinds of restaurants are going to be interesting to various social styles and then to various VALS types, and what type of social style you think each VALS type is likely to exhibit. What is the dominant VALS type? Now, there are no right or wrong answers to this. It's a sort of a matter of opinion, but I think we can, some of them I are more certain of than others. So social styles are not as in-depth as personality. You could take the social styles test, and it's a fairly short instrument. You can find it, you can Google social styles test online, and there's a version of it that will give you a PDF that automatically scores it and tells you what social style you are. And if you've been in the sales classes, you've done this, right? Bob has you take the social style test in his class. I don't know if Emily does or not, but I mean, you've probably been exposed to this if you've been a sales student in our program. So it's not as in-depth. Personality was developed by psychologists like Carl Jung, and it's a much more in-depth when we talk about personality, and then we talk about sort of psychological disorders, right? And there's instruments that measure that are far more detailed. The most sophisticated of these is called the MMPI, and most of you have probably never taken the MMPI. There is a pseudoscientific sort of version of this, and every single time I hear people talk about it, I cringe and I want to like shoot them in the head because it just is not like at all legitimate. It's called Myers-Briggs. How many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs? Did you take it at a management course? How many of you took it? Oh, yeah, great. I mean, like when they do this, I'm just like, you people have PhDs, you should know that this is not a legitimate instrument, right? It's just, it's not. Lots of businesses use it because they think it means something, and it's horrible derivative scholarship that should never have been published, but whatever. The MMPI, if you believe, now, the foundational disciplines of marketing are economics and psychology, and I make merciless fun of both of those disciplines because, they are worthy of being made fun of. I recognize that, that they are the foundations of marketing, but we've gone way beyond both of those to a point where we actually can prove things. One of the reasons I think that economics is, like voodoo, is they're never good at predicting anything. Like, the economists are all talking about when we're going to have the next recession or depression, and they've been wrong, just like consistently every single time. They're really good at explaining stuff after it happens, but that's history, not science, right? I mean, like, once it occurs, they're like, oh, well, the reason that we had the recession is because, and it's like, that's not real science. So I make merciless fun of both of these. And the reason I say this is because I'm not sure that I believe that the MMPI is as wonderful as they say it is, but from an academic perspective, this instrument has been tested for reliability and validity over and over and over again, and it is a robust instrument. It is made up of a number of scales, and it consists of several hundred questions, and so that's what personality, and it is very good at identifying personality and psychological disorders, right? So the MMPI is the most robust instrument. That's not what social styles are. Social styles are really about how we communicate with each other. It's not as in-depth as personality, although personality does play a role in that, right? I mean, so your personality is probably going to have some influence over the type of social style that you exhibit, but it's certainly not as in-depth. And if you've taken the social styles test, you will realize that it's not an instrument that takes hours and hours and hours to complete like the MMPI. So social styles develops a 2x2 matrix, and on the vertical axis is the degree of responsiveness that you have, and on the horizontal axis is the degree of assertiveness. So how responsive are you to persuasion and appeals, and then how assertive are you? So there's a 2x2 matrix, so you have low and high levels, and it's a continuum. So there are people that are, highly in one quadrant or another, and then there are people that sort of fall. It's close in these categories. I am not really close. Every time I've taken the social styles test, what do you think I am? Anybody know? What?
Are you high assertive?
I'm highly assertive, yeah. You think I'm an analytical? That's probably my secondary style. It's not my
You're a
dominant.
driver.
I'm a driver. Yeah, I'm a driver. I have a tendency to tell and, not really listen too much to other people. I have a tendency to think that I know it all, and I do. But, so 2x2 matrix, depending on responsiveness and assertiveness, 4 types that you can have. So analytical, which is my secondary style, low responsive, low assertive. They're very serious. They think things over. They're persistent, and they ask a lot of questions. So analyticals can suffer from what we call analysis paralysis. And this is one of the things that I can be victim of. So when I was married, our microwave went out, and have I told you the story?
No.
No, okay. Our microwave went out, so I start compiling the notebook. That's what I do. Like when I'm gonna make a purchase, I start compiling a notebook. And I have a tendency to do this even for things that are not necessarily high-risk purchases. In the past, buying a microwave would have been a high-risk purchase. So I remember the first microwave that my family bought. It was this huge box. It cost $1,000. This was in the 1970s, and $1,000 was a lot of money in the 1970s. Cost $1,000 for this box. It had 2 dials on it, so there were only 2 controls. And it only had it had 3 settings, I believe. One dial was for the settings, so there was low, medium, and high. And low was for like defrost, medium, and then high. It did not have a turntable in it, which that's one of the things that modern microwaves do so that it heats evenly. You had to sort of turn things yourself. You had to open it and sort of adjust where the dish was in the microwave. Really, in that first era of microwave. So there was this dial that had low, medium, and high. And what that did is that determined how frequently the food was being zapped, right? So low was like it would go on for out of a minute, 15 seconds. Medium was it would be on for 30 seconds, and high was it was on for a full 60 seconds throughout the cooking. The second dial on it was the timer. And so you would dial in, you know, and I think it only went to something like 15 minutes. That was the most you could put something in. So very basic, $1,000. That was a high risk purchase at the time. This is not really a high risk purchase today. The average microwave you can buy for less than $100. And it does a lot more than that microwave did, which basically, as far as I can tell, the old microwaves were really just good for boiling water really quickly because they were horrible at actually cooking food. It would end up where half of it would be like unedible because it was so hot, and the other half of it would be frozen if you didn't sort of turn the product in the microwave yourself. So microwaves today have all kinds of different features. They're far more complex than that. They have all kinds of buttons on them that, you know, for example, one of the things that people use the microwave for a lot in this day and age is to pop microwave popcorn, right? You throw the bag of popcorn in there, it makes a wonderful snack for you. And there's a specific button on the microwave that is, you know, you just throw the bag in there and you hit the popcorn button and it goes to town. They have ones now that if you hit the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 button, will automatically go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 minutes. You know, you just hit it and it automatically goes for that amount of time. They have microwaves that are also a regular oven. So they've got a heating element to them. So you can, you know, so I start compiling the notebook on all of these things. What is it that we need in a microwave? What is it that we use it for? What kinds of features do the microwave have? How much power does the microwave have? I've got this notebook and I come home one day and my insignificant other has purchased a microwave, right? And I'm like, what's this, Robin? It's a microwave. Well, why'd you buy that one? Well, it matched our other appliances. Did you consult the notebook? Like, did you think about this from a rational, comprehensive perspective? No, I just went out and bought a No, don't do that, right? Like, you need to
She was rational.
decide.
She matched the other appliances.
That's a stupid way
Whoa.
of
That's
purchasing
relative.
this product, right? I mean, you need to decide what it is that the primary function of, you know, and since I don't actually use the microwave, I'm not even sure we really needed it. Like, I have a tendency to actually cook, right? Because I know how to do this. But you know, like this is what analyticals do. They think about everything in a very in-depth way, and that's what I was doing there. Is, you know, I was being an analytical, and as a result, you know, apparently I did not purchase the microwave in a timely fashion. And so somebody, you know, because I was so busy thinking about what it is that we're going to use this microwave. Like, I hate popcorn. I just hate it. It's just awful. I don't like it. So, you know, the popcorn button feature is not going to be attractive to me. That was one of the things that, you know, so I'm looking for one that does not, and it's hard to find actually. It's hard to find a microwave that doesn't have a popcorn button on it.
What?
Right? I mean, it's really, really hard. So, you know, I'm thinking about this, and in the meantime, somebody just goes out and buys the microwave. So asking a lot of questions, thinking about things. So what kind of, as we think about this, because we're thinking about promotion, what kinds of restaurants are going to be appealing to analyticals? What kind of restaurant do you think is going to be appealing to an analytical? somebody who thinks about things a lot.
It's probably not the best, but one that has a lot of options.
Okay,
If that's like-
you're probably correct.
Yeah.
One that has a lot of options because they want to think about things.
Cheesecake.
Cheese, that's exactly,
Yeah.
yes. Not only does Cheesecake Factory have an enormous amount of options, but the Cheesecake Factory also gives you a lot of detail about those options. They describe the food with a lot of specificity in terms of what you're going to get. And yeah, I think analyticals would love that. And oddly enough, the Cheesecake Factory is one of those few, this is just sort of my shameless plug for the Cheesecake Factory. It's one of the few restaurants that does a lot of things and it does all of them well, actually. I've never had, and I've eaten a lot of stuff at the Cheesecake Factory. I've never actually had cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory because I'm usually so full that when it gets to dessert, I'm just not at all interested
You take it
in
to go.
dessert. So I've never actually had the cheesecake from the Cheesecake Factory, but I've had lots of their food. And they do all of it well. Most places that try to do everything, they do it poorly.
Yeah.
The Cheesecake Factory actually does it well.
So they get the endorsement.
They do, yeah, I mean, I like the Cheesecake Factory. So, but there's lots to think about. Now, from a perspective of your fellow party, it can be bad for an analytical or it can be bad for them because they're gonna sit there and have to think about this for a long time, right? And if you're hungry, you want the food and so, but I think analyticals do like things like the Cheesecake Factory because they have a lot of choices and you can analyze a lot of things. It tells you the calorie count and all of this. It's gonna be, just fantastic from that perspective. So I think that is correct.
And their waiters are trained. Like,
And
don't
yes,
ask
they
them
are.
first.
They are very good at telling you and describing and telling you, whether or not they, I mean, they're great at giving suggestions based on sort of asking you questions and finding out what it is that you want. So I think that's appealing to an analytical. High responsive, low assertive are amiables. These people are loyal, they're personable, they're patient, and they're exceedingly uncomfortable with risk. They tend to be friendly and outgoing, but they don't like risk. They like things that are known, and they tend to be, very fond of what we might call the status quo, right? So what kind of restaurant do you think?
Diners, caves.
Diners, like what kind of diner?
Mom's diners in my
Okay.
hometowns.
Right,
They
okay,
know it's the same menu. They know they have their same waiter, waitress.
all right. So yeah, if they're familiar with it, maybe. If they're traveling, maybe not so much. One of the things that is interesting about food is that if you don't eat at established branded restaurants, you run the risk of not having a good experience, right? So when my brother and I graduated from law school, we graduated from law school at the same time. And my mom was like, we're never gonna be able to take a trip, just the three of us together again, because you're both gonna go off and you're gonna start families and it will be more and more complicated. So she wanted to take this trip. So we took a road trip. We were both off. This was in the sort of late fall, early winter. And we went to Kansas City because there's just lots of stuff that all of us like to do in Kansas City. So we went to Kansas City. On the way back, we took a different route. So we went up one way and we came back a different way. And we went through Joplin, Missouri. And one of the reasons we went through Joplin, Missouri was because we had actually thought about moving there at one point in time. It's a historic town. They've got lots of Victorian architecture there. And so we thought we'd go and look at some of the houses and see what happened to the ones that we'd thought about buying. And it starts to snow. Like before we get into Joplin, it's like this winter storm hits and it's a blizzard. And lots of stuff is shutting down as a result of the fact that there's the winter snow. And this is when you could still smoke in restaurants. I know you find that hard to believe, but there were, like people they used to be fervent smokers
You can smoke in
in,
restaurants.
huh?
You can smoke in restaurants.
Not in Oklahoma. You
Oh,
can't.
Like in the early 2000s, you could, there was this.
Oh,
movie,
yes,
Non-Smoking.
yes,
I
there was
remember
smoking and non-smoking, so my brother's gotta go to the bathroom, we find this one diner that is open, and we pull in, and we walk in, and my mother, who is this rabid anti-smoker, I mean, my mother, and it's unusual, I am a rabid anti-smoker, but I used to be a smoker, and in the words of my grandmother, there is nothing worse than a reformed whore. Right, so,
What?
you become like holier than thou, right? And so I'm a reformed smoker, and I am a rabid, like it's like you'll live 10 years longer if you quit smoking right now. I mean, I'm sort of adamant about it. But my mother she's never been a smoker, ever. She's always been an athlete. She's never been a smoker, and she's just this rabid anti-smoker. And we walk into this diner. It's the only thing that's open because everything's closing in Joplin. And she says, "Oh my God, there's smoking in here." And the waitress, who's also the hostess that day because she's the only one who came in, runs over and she's like, "I'm not gonna lie, you ought to just leave now because we have a non-smoking section, but it wafts. It just wafts all over the place." And my mom's like, "Okay, let's leave." And I'm like, we're starving to death. There's nothing else open. Raoul's got to go to the bathroom. We're staying. And so my mother says, "Well, at least this is like a country diner. At least the food will probably be good." So we sit down, and the waitress says, "Well, I don't know about that." My mom's like, "Well, I think I'll have the meatloaf. Like, this is a country diner. Like, meatloaf is probably, it's gonna," and she's like, "It ain't your mama's meatloaf. That ain't my meatloaf either." And my mother's like, "What's wrong with me? How can you screw up meatloaf, right? I mean,"
Seriously.
and she's like, "Well, when you see people going, they're looking for some flavor there, and there ain't the flavor in his meatloaf." And so we go down this list, and she's got something to say about everything until I was like, "Fine, I'll have a grilled cheese." She's like, "Oh, that's good. He can't," and she uses an expletive. He can't that up, right? I mean, like a grilled cheese. So that's what I'm having, is this grilled cheese. So my point is that, yeah, like if they know the diner, maybe, but if you're traveling, amiables who are uncomfortable with risk, there's lots of risk in local restaurants that are not chains, right? So if you're traveling, maybe an amiable would want something that's a chain restaurant. And so the one that I would use is something like Chili's. Chili's is like, it's the same, crappy food, but it's consistent. It's better than McDonald's, but it's the same from coast to coast. You know what Chili's is? It's hamburgers and chili, and salads and things like that, but it's the same. And so if you're uncomfortable with risk, you know what the menu's gonna be. And it's gonna be pretty consistent nationwide, right? So I think amiables would appreciate that.
So McDonald's wouldn't be in that category?
Oh, yeah, I think amiables, if they're not opposed to McDonald's. And when we talk about VALs, when we talk about high and low access to resources, it's gonna depend on whether or not they have high or low access to resources. So if they have high access to resources, you're gonna find a lot of amiables that probably don't have high access to resources. I'll give you, at least she says this, I don't know if that's true. Stacia, who's the current department head, who I will be taking over this summer as department head, she says she's an amiable. So when we used to do tests in class, for example, when I came back to UC, I taught here for a long time, and then I went and got my PhD and came back. I did this thing where if you didn't bring a Scantron, I charged 50 cents for Scantrons. And Stacia just thought that was horrible that I would do that. And I'm like, this is a business school. Like, these are business decisions. You need to You need to pay the kind, like people didn't have 50 cents. I'm like, well, I'll take your phone until you can bring me the 50 cents. And you know, she's like, well, I can't believe you do that. She just gives people Scantrons. I'm like, you're training students, you know, like to not bring Scantrons, right? And like UCO's poor, we're broke. We can't afford. Now, turns out you can get free Scantrons from UCOSA, right? So apparently we can't afford it. But I charged 50 cents for the Scantrons, and then I gave her all the money. And she used it for, you know, like to buy the secretary's flowers on Flowers Day or whatever. But charge for the Scantrons. I don't have to do that anymore. I kind of miss doing that because the exams are, I really do. It was really kind of like, it was funny to see students like reaction when I'd say it's 50 cents. Like, I don't have 50 cents. Well, sucks to be you, doesn't it? Right? I mean, you know.
Did someone have to like not take the test because they didn't have 50 cents?
No, they give me their phone. Like, I'm like, I'll take your phone
Where do you get
until
50
you can get 50 cents. Huh?
Where do you get 50 cents from?
Well, I know this is hard to believe, but in the past, people actually used to carry cash. They actually used
You
to.
take
to do
Venmo?
this. They didn't have Venmo. I mean, since Venmo's been around, I've been doing tests online, but yeah, I guess I would take Venmo.
It's so funny.
I believe
Pay
more
the-
money that way.
Pay the school back the 50 cents, so I put it into our petty cash fund. So Stacy is just, she's an amiable, right? She has a high access to resources. Both she and her husband are marketing professors. Marketing professors make good living. And so she, you know, I'm not sure she's gonna like McDonald's, but she's probably gonna like Chili's. You know, she's gonna like stuff that you know, Outback, things like that, where it's gonna be pretty consistent over and over. If you have low access to resources, yeah, amiables are probably gonna like McDonald's because it's cheap, it's fast, it's consistent,
It's
right?
road trip food.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on a road trip, really McDonald's is in many respects, if you don't care what you're eating, it's a great choice because the restrooms are clean. I mean, they always have clean restrooms, unlike you go into the local Greasy Spoon and it can be a nightmare. You know, or you go into McDonald's and it's clean. So yeah, they're uncomfortable with risk. I think if they have low access to resources, they're probably gonna like McDonald's. Drivers, low responsive, high assertiveness, very task oriented. They prefer clearly defined goals, they're committed, and they are risk takers, right? So I tend to be a driver. What kinds of restaurants are going to appeal to drivers if you're a risk taker?
Standalone restaurants or ones that are like a buffet or where you build your own meal.
Okay,
Just open.
you think that, like they're gonna,
I think
like local restaurants, so you're willing to try, and that's true. I am far more willing than a lot of people to go and try when we travel, whatever is like a not chain, whatever is a local restaurant. They also tend to, because they're risk takers, their palate is far more expansive than somebody who is not a risk taker, right? So like things like sushi are not gonna be a big appeal to somebody who is not a risk taker. Because sushi is sort of one of those things. Now it's become less exotic in this country. But I remember when the first sushi restaurant actually opened in Oklahoma and I thought, huh, that's not gonna last. You know, that'll be gone. And then when they opened the first vegan restaurant, I was like, oh, that not gonna last. And it's actually lasted. I'm kind of amazed that
What was it?
I can't even remember the name of it. It's in class and
The Red Cup.
yeah, and it's, I mean, vegan, like craziness. We're a steak producing, steak, but people like that are willing to try stuff that is different. And even though I don't like fish, I do actually like sushi, and I will eat sushi even though I'm not a huge fish fan. It's a texture issue, but like sushi is a great way of combining wasabi and soy sauce, and it's a great catalyst. And people sort of look at you funny when you just eat the soy sauce and the wasabi by itself. So I'm
So
willing to
why-
eat it.
Why are they like risk takers, but also they like define goals?
So in terms of like their jobs and things like that. But you can be a risk taker and want to find goals. You can say, I want to, for example, learn to fly an airplane, which is a highly risky activity, but it's a clearly defined goal, right? I mean, there's a step that there's things that you do if you want to become a pilot, but it's a highly risky thing, right? They're willing to go skydiving, and you know that's something that you can have a clearly defined goal and still be a risk taker. Now you can also be a risk taker and not have clearly defined goals, and that's a different social style, right? So yeah, clearly defined goals. The fact that they're committed also would tend to, for a lot of people, think if you're committed, you're not a risk taker, but you can be committed to taking risky positions, right? Think about Donald Trump. He's clearly committed in what he says, and it's clearly risky, right? I mean, he was absolutely certain when he said, trade wars are easy to win. I'm going to start a trade war with China and I'm going to win it. He was clearly committed to that. It was clearly a risky position because when you disrupt the supply chain, bad things happen. And when you engage in a trade war, you are in essence disrupting the supply chain, right? I mean, people, and once you do that, it's hard to reestablish. So you can be, and he was task oriented. He was like a dog with a bone about, you know, he was going to show communist China how the cow ate the cabbage, and that was, you know, clearly task oriented. He was on message. He was a committed, very, you know, on message politician, and it was a risk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would drivers, since we're like talking about like the food aspect of it, would drivers like cook for themselves most of the
To
time?
the extent that anybody, like, I actually cook for myself, but you know, I'm probably in the minority. My brother never cooks, ever, you know, and he's a driver as well, but he never cooks because it just doesn't, there's no time.
But
for
like
that.
based off of like the characteristic.
Yeah, I think that to the extent that anybody cooks for themselves anymore, right? I mean, lots of people don't. I mean, most people eat out, it seems like. One of the most interesting things to me is you go into these homes in Edmond and everybody wants to have something that resembles a commercial kitchen now, and they never use it. Like you open, you know, like the refrigerator and it's like, they've got these sub-zero fridges and there's like nothing in them. It's insane. Expressives, high responsive, high assertive, people oriented, centers of attention. These are the ones that, unlike drivers, they're risk takers, not necessarily goal oriented, right? They're more interested in people. They're more interested in being the center of attention. They can be enormously emotional. They're talkative. They can be very dramatic. They're, you know, like on the stages of Europe, and they're, you know, they're the actors. And so this is an example of how you can have somebody who's highly assertive, not necessarily goal oriented, because they can be sort of flighty and irrational. So what kinds of restaurants do you think are going to be appealing to expressives?
Brand new ones.
The
or
Stone
brunch.
Lions Inn.
The Stone Lion Inn. That's like
Okay.
that's like a shameless, you know,
You are
plug, right? But yeah, I think that's something that's different than you're gonna get just anywhere. It's not, you know, it's not a menu that you are gonna experience in just any old restaurant, right? I mean, I think things like, if you know what Lou Divine is, if you know what Lou Divine is, it's a restaurant that does locally sourced stuff. I think that's gonna be appealing to expressives, this idea of there's a lot of creativity in the food. The presentation is really unique. It's really, really wonderful. They're gonna like that. They're gonna be attracted to it. So I think those are ones that are gonna be attractive. There's
About like a hibachi.
hibachi, yeah, I think that, yes, because there's a show to that and there's a flair about it. It used to be more of a thing than it is now. I mean, it's kind of, when the first ones opened up, I think they were a chain called Benihana. They were the first hibachi. It was really, really novel. It's not so novel anymore. I can think of like 6 restaurants in Oklahoma City that do it, whereas historically there was one. It was called Shogun, but now you've got Musashi's, you've got Shogun, you've got a bunch of them. But yeah, it's definitely, it's an experience. It's not just about dining, right? It's about the show and the fire that they create. So I think that's would be attractive to expressives as well. So we're gonna combine these with strategic business insights. You can, what's so funny?
I said Chuck E. Cheese.
Chuck E. Cheese. You think expressives are gonna like
I
Chuck E.
think
Cheese?
they love it.
I think you should take a decade away for that.
I think, okay, I guess it depends on the expressive.
The E in his name is entertainment, so
That is true.
they love it.
I
Wow.
have
That
not
was
been,
powerful.
I have not been to a Chuck E. Cheese in years. I've been told that they no longer have the animatronic things in them, that it's now videos instead of like when I was a kid growing up, Chuck E. Cheese had like this Disneyland like animatronics that had a band, and there was a show every 30 minutes, and so it was interesting.
Chucky comes out.
You can take this test if you go to strategicbusinessinsights.com. You can take the VALS test and tell where you are. What the VALS does, and when we think about promotion, so what we want to do, part of promotion obviously is professional selling. And so as professional salespeople, what we want to do is we want to figure out what the social style of our prospect is so that we can most successfully communicate with that person. A lot of times what happens in communication is if you don't know what the social style is, or you're not receptive, or you're not thinking about it, or you're not picking up on what the social style is, you're going to make mistakes in the presentation. You're going to present in ways that are not going to be receptive to the individual. For example, I did some training, some consulting for an insurance agency, and they were talking about what do I do? One of the things that they wanted to know was, if I have people that are like, just give me the quote, just give me the quote, just give me the quote. That's obviously somebody who's a driver, right? If they're saying, I just want the quote, just give me the quote. I don't, do not. And how do you deal with that? Because their whole thing is, this insurance agency that I did this consulting for, was that they are not Geico. Like, if you want cheap insurance, if that's what you want, you're gonna go with Geico. And somebody who's like, just give me the quote, is maybe just price sensitive and just looking for the price, and they wanted to know, how do you overcome that? And I said, well, ultimately, if you have a driver, you need to give them the quote, and then you need to say something like, can I explain why this? And literally, if you've ever had an accident and you've been, involved with Geico, I had an accident with somebody that pulled out in front of me when I was on a motorcycle, and it led to, my dropping the bike and having a wreck. And the insured who like pulled out in front of me, she's looking right at me, and like, it's crazy. People will do this. They'll pull out right in front of you. She had Geico. It was a horrific experience from a customer service perspective, right? Which is why things like State Farm, they have a lot better customer experience, but that comes at a cost, right? It's not, Geico is pretty much, they're gonna shoot you a quote and they're gonna stick to it, and that's what you're gonna get. So if you have that, you're gonna have to say, look, here's the quote. Now, will you let me explain to you why you want to go with State Farm as opposed to Geico or Progressive, which are the online cheap alternatives, right? So we're going to learn how to talk to people, or how to make our appeals if we're dealing with ads, to appeal to these various types. And if you have a driver, if your product is going to be attractive to drivers, you're gonna have to be much more straightforward in the ad rather than, theatrical, which if you recall, I think we watched in here the herding cats ad. Did we watch the herding cats ad?
No,
I would swear we watched the herding cats ad.
we did not.
We did not watch the herding cats ad. Okay, so let's watch the herding cats ad.
When's your sister coming back? I mean, she's fun.
Sure the volume is up on this.
Best.
Get this to.
She's really in a name.
This
What?
All right, so that was an award-winning ad. That was an award-winning ad the year it came. It was a Super Bowl ad.
That makes more
Now,
sense, yeah.
the problem with that ad is that nobody remembered the company. They remember the ad because you have this sort of iconic imagery of an aspect of American culture, which is really unique. I mean, we have this image in the United States, particularly of the West and what it is, and that is an iconic image. And then you juxtapose it with something that is, completely unexpected, which is novel, which is herding cats, right? Nobody thinks of cowboys as being gentle and herding little, felines around. So it's an interesting ad. So that's going to be appealing to an expressive, right? Because it's creative, it's dramatic, not going to be all that appealing to a driver. And that's one of the problems, is that the company that it was selling to, or even an analytical, was largely, EDS was a technology company. And so I don't know how effective the ad was, because you're not necessarily matching. It's very creative. If that were an ad for, the latest play or a new theater or something like that, I think it would have worked. But a lot of the people that are in tech tend to be analyticals or drivers. They like the structure and organization of things, and I'm not sure that was the best ad. So in thinking about these, the way the VALS types work, so we're going to talk about social styles in terms of how to present to somebody. VALS is going to tell us what motivates them, what they're interested in, rather than how to talk to them, right? So the approach that we take and the method, and when I teach sales, one of the things I talk about is matching social styles to things like closings or types of approaches that we have in sales. And so you think about that. VALS is going to tell us not how to do that kind of approach, but what's going to motivate the person that we're talking to. So the way VALS works is, rather than being a 2x2 matrix, it is a 2x3 matrix, depending on whether or not, with two types that fall outside of the matrix, whether or not you have high access to resources or low access to resources, and then whether or not you are motivated by ideas, achievement, or expression, self-expression. So what motivates you? Is it thoughts and abstraction? Is it achieving something like learning how to, climb the rock wall, down at the what is it, like Oklahoma City Rocks, which is on the Riverwalk. If that's interesting to you, or are you motivated by self-expression? Are you motivated by creating something, being an artist, or being a crafter, or things like that? So high access to resources, low access to resources. High access to resources, innovators have high access to resources, but they're motivated by a combination of all three of these things. And then survivors have really low access to resources, and they may not be, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to get by. And so maybe understanding their motivation is more difficult. So we'll start with innovators. Innovators are constantly taking in information. They make the highest number of financial transactions of any group. So these are the people who, in the early ages, in the early days of E-Trade, historically, if you wanted to buy stocks, you went through a broker. You went through a traditional broker, and most people bought stocks, or they buy stocks through their 401k, or if you're like me, because you're a public sector employee, a 403b. That's how most people hold stocks. Lots of people don't have any investment in stocks whatsoever, which is one of the things. Like, one of the things that was interesting about Donald Trump was he was constantly talking about the stock market, and his voters are not actually impacted by the stock market because they're the least likely to have investments in stocks. But to the extent that you have investments in stocks, these people would be the first ones. When E-Trade came out, this revolutionized the ability to purchase stocks because, it's a risk and it's scary for a lot of people. But they would be the first ones to jump on and open up an E-Trade account. They have the highest number of financial transactions. They're skeptical, enormously skeptical of advertising. Innovators do not view advertising as a legitimate source of information in any way, shape, or form. They're going to figure it out on their own. So when we talk about the promotion aspect of marketing, these people are the ones that you're going to least likely to find their information by watching television and seeing an ad. In terms of the tools of the promotion, so what are the tools that we have for promotion? Well, we have traditional advertising, we have public relations, we have professional selling. What kinds of promotional aspects to reach these people are you going to have for innovators, do you think? There's direct, there's direct promotion, which is things like sending postcards, flyers.
What about like industry shows where people can?
Okay, yeah, they're, depending on what industry that might be, yes, they're gonna be interested. They may go to that. Yeah, I think personal selling, usually industry shows involve personal selling, right? That's gonna be the easiest way to reach these people because they're gonna be skeptical of stuff. Now they'll find it on their own because they're interested in things, and so they're gonna learn about what it is that they want to find, right? They have an international perspective, so these people are likely to have traveled widely and understand there are lots of people now in the plutocracy. And there's a book called Plutocrats, which details these people, that they don't really view themselves as citizens of any nation. They view themselves as citizens of the world. If you are exceedingly wealthy and you have, a lot of access to information, you're less likely to be highly nationalistic in this day and age because the world is, if you've traveled a lot, you realize that the world's a pretty small place. And these people are constantly jumping on a plane and going someplace. And so they are the least likely to exhibit high degrees of nationalism, patriotism. If you think about Bill and Melinda Gates and what they've done, their foundation is not, they are, I mean, clearly innovators. Bill Gates, starts this company. And the interesting thing about him is he's not really, Bill Gates never really like manufactured anything himself. He took other people's stuff and made it better. So in the early ages of Microsoft, Bill Gates did not develop an operating system. He bought an operating system and then made it better. But having said that, he's clearly an innovator. In that, I mean, he took something, he's not an original thinker necessarily, and made it better. So the early version of Microsoft was what he bought was something called QDOS, and that stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. And then they changed it to just DOS, and they realized like QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System, has got kind of a negative connotation. So it became DOS, which was Digital Operating System. And then, he transforms that into Windows. His foundation is focused on a global perspective. He considers himself, in many respects, to be a global citizen. The things that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is interested in are world large scale problems. It's HIV/AIDS, it's poverty, it's education, which are things that are global challenges. They are not specific to a location. As opposed to, for example, tornado relief, right? Where do tornadoes occur? Well, primarily in the United States. They have had tornadoes in Europe. It's very rare. Primarily in the US and primarily sort of in the center of the country. Now, they have had a tornado recently in New York, but like that's just crazy. It doesn't happen very often. They've had tornadoes in California. That doesn't happen. It sort of happens like here, right? I mean, we have Moore, which was wiped out 3 years in a row by tornadoes. That's a local sort of problem. The Gates Foundation focuses on these global things. They are big believers in research and development as credible sources of information. They're receptive to new ideas and technology. They enjoy problem solving and figuring things out. And they have the widest variety of interests. So again, are you motivated by ideals, achievement, or self-expression? These are the people that are what we might think of as being Renaissance individuals. And why do we say that? Well, what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a reaction to the time period before it, which some people have labeled, it's a rather old term now. They used to call it the Dark Ages. And so when I lecture on things like the Dark Ages, why was it dark? Right? Nobody ran around in the Dark Ages, which are now called the medieval period, saying, Jesus, it's so dark in here, I wish somebody would turn on the lights, right? That's not why it was called the Dark Ages. We watch these films about the Dark Ages, and they're always like very film noir, they're very dark. Like there was, the sun shone during the Dark Ages as much as the sun shines today. They were called the Dark Ages because a lot of ancient philosophy was lost during that time period in the Western world, in the Western intellectual tradition. So that's why they were called the Dark Ages. It was rediscovered largely during the Renaissance, which was this rebirth. And we think of a lot of the people like Machiavelli during the Renaissance as being, this sort of well-rounded individual. This is somebody who Machiavelli is clearly interested in philosophy. He's writing books. He's writing the history of Florence. He's writing the prints. He's also very active and involved in politics. He was a statesman for the city of Florence. He was the head of, the sort of the State Department at one point, what they had back then. So these are people that are actively engaged. So it's the contemplative life, but it's also a life of activity. So they're motivated by all of these sorts of things. So you're going to find these people going skydiving and achieving things like that. Going to, how many of you, this is one of the new things that's become popular, forever and ever and ever, people just sort of thought like artistic ability was something that you sort of had or you didn't. And there are now these companies that have popped up in all major cities. There's one that's in Guthrie called the Tipsy Artist, which is, you go and you drink bottles of wine and you learn how to paint in oil. And, they sort of take you step by step how to do this. These are the kinds of people that are going to be doing all those kinds of things. So what kind of restaurant do you think would be appealing to an innovator in the Oklahoma City area? Got to think. Well, I mentioned one earlier, Ludivine, I think is something that's going to be appealing to an innovator. It's the menu changes. It's a lot of locally sourced stuff. It's going to be very unique. It's going to be a different experience. It's plated beautifully. If you've ever eaten at Ludivine, they work at this. It's going to be things like that. When Vast first opened in Oklahoma City, I think Vast would have been attractive. Now, the thing about innovators is that they're not necessarily loyal to one thing. They're going to switch. And so Vast has been open for a while. So I don't know that you're going to find a lot of innovators there because it's been there for a while now. The wonderful thing about the restaurant industry is that there's lots of openings, there's lots of changes constantly. And so I think that's going to be one of the things that they're going to be willing to try lots of different stuff.
So do you think with like the one that has the changing menu, are they more likely to continue to go there versus?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, because Ludivine does change their menu more frequently than other places. There have been changes. One of the groups that I like a lot of the Hal Smith properties. So Pub W is a Hal Smith. They change their menu from time to time. Now they've really upset me because one of the things I liked that they had was burnt ends, and they've taken those off the menu, and that's very distressing to me because I like that. But yeah, they're going to be more attracted to things that are, constantly changing. And there are these restaurants that in a lot of places that have like sort of a set menu. They don't give you a lot of choices, but it changes a lot. They'll do things. At one point in time, Deep Fork, there was a group that was largely owned by good old Aubrey McClendon, who started Chesapeake. And good old Aubrey was a good old crook and was about to go to prison. And so I think he faked his death. I'm convinced of this. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but I really think that Aubrey faked his death and is probably alive somewhere in the Caribbean. There's a whole book that's been written, by the way, for people who want to do this about how to fake your death and where to go to do this. But good old Aubrey, who was a good old crook, owned the Deep Fork Group. And one of the things that they used to do, the name of the group was founded on this restaurant called the Deep Fork. And they used to do wine tastings and wine pairings. And so that would be a set menu that they would do once a month. And they would have 5 courses and 5 different wines. And they would pair, the chef would work with vintners and come up with a menu that revolved around wine. And so that's going to be attractive to them because that's something completely new and novel, and trying to find those sorts of pairings, I think, is going to be attractive to an innovator. If you have high access to resources and you're motivated by ideas, that's a thinker. So thinkers are very historically motivated. They like the historical perspective in terms of the activities that they like. These are going to be people that love to go to the museum and learn about things. They're gonna be the ones that like to go to the battlefields of the Revolutionary War. You can go, when my brother lived in Saratoga Springs, we did this. There's a very famous battlefield in Saratoga because one of the most famous battles in American Revolutionary history was called the Battle of Saratoga. And you can go there. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about the American Revolution is Washington lost more battles than he won, and yet he won the Revolutionary War. Why is that? If you have any knowledge of history, you sort of realize that was maybe inevitable. Why is it that was inevitable? Well, if you have read The Prince and Machiavelli, which is, a historic work of political science, a foundational work, it's very hard to maintain control of a people who don't want to be controlled if they're on their own land. It's one of the reasons why it was Afghanistan went right back to being what it was before we invaded, which is a horrible dictatorial regime, right? Because those people just wait until you've had enough. We tried this in Vietnam. If we look at the number of people who died in Vietnam on the Vietnamese side versus the American side, we killed far more of them than they killed of us. But what happened? Well, we got tired of Americans coming home in body bags, right? So it's very difficult. So people who like this kind of perspective, they have this idea of history is important and knowing history is important so that you don't repeat it. What kinds of things are going to be appealing to somebody who has a historic perspective in terms of restaurants in Oklahoma City? What do you think? You think the Cattleman's Cafe and the Stockyards? Yeah, I think that's a really good example because it's a staple. The quality is, it's always very good. It's high, but it's not something that's a chain. It's well known. It's established. It's the food is excellent. There's used to be a restaurant called the Coach House in Oklahoma City. It's no longer there, but it was Oklahoma City's when Mobil did the ratings. So forever and ever and ever, the rating system in the United States was done by Mobil, and it was a very strong or strict guidelines in terms of the ratings. Now, when people say things like, I'm a 4-star restaurant, it doesn't really mean anything because that could be like 4-star on TripAdvisor is not what Mobil was. Mobil tried to be the American version of Michelin, right? So Michelin did a rating system in Europe. They have now come to the United States, but there are not very many cities that they actually do ratings in. So I think there are 5 cities in the United States that Michelin rates: New York, Chicago, LA, New Orleans, and San Francisco, I think. They may be in more, but it's a very limited. But Mobil was what Michelin tried to be, except Mobil had a different rating. So Michelin, the rating is what? Anybody know?
Isn't it like
It's 3 stars, right? So 1 star is like good, 2 is exceptional, and they used to say 3 is only for the gods, right? To get a 3-star rating. But Mobil did this, and they had professionals who did this, that went out and tried different restaurants. You didn't know when they were coming. They just, would make a reservation. You didn't know who they were, so you couldn't prepare for it. And there was a 4-star Mobil 4-star restaurant in Oklahoma City called the Coach House. Exceedingly good service, very good quality, white linen tablecloths, heavy silverware, waiters that were in, a tuxedo shirt and bow ties with tuxedo pants that would do this. They had what were actually called WAs, waiter assistants. So you'd have a waiter and then you'd have a WA. The waiter never actually brought your water or anything like that. He would be the one that would tell you about what was on the menu or what they had, the specials, and take your order. But it was pretty much the WA that did all of the work. for it. That was something that would have been appealing to people who are thinkers, because it's an established kind of thing. It has a history. The Coach House is no longer there. There is a restaurant that's similar in the same area that was in Nichols Hills called the Metro that is still there. And you'll find a lot of people that are thinkers in the Metro. It's, they don't advertise. You have to sort of know about it. It's not someplace that you could find easily. There's not like a huge sign. I don't believe the Coach House had any signs when it was open. The Metro has a very discreet sign. Have any of you eaten at the Metro? Anybody know? You don't, why are you shaking your head? You don't like the Metro? Why didn't you like it?
It's just not
Why did you think it wasn't
good. I
good?
think it's like bland.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I mean, it's very traditional sort of, it's not prepared in the way things are, you know, today in terms of like, everything's ultra hot and spicy. I mean, it's a very sort of traditional fare menu. I don't think it's bland, but you know, I've never had a bad meal at the Metro. But it's one of those things where you have to like the food. I mean, what a lot of people like is they like now, which is really odd because when I first moved to Oklahoma, everything was bland. I mean, everything tasted like there was no spice on. They thought salt was an exotic spice, apparently. Now everybody tries to outdo themselves on the heat, and you know, it's like hot for the sake of hot. So this historical perspective, there were a couple other restaurants in Oklahoma City that have gone under that would have been appealing. There's one called the Haunted House. Again, you couldn't even find it unless you knew about it. You had to have known somebody who'd been there. They had absolutely no signs. It was in this haunted mansion that was in northwest Oklahoma City, but it was down a dirt road. And so you was not like you were ever gonna see it from the street. They didn't ever advertise, so those kinds of things. These people are very financially established, not influenced by trends or what's hot. So they're not gonna be going to, you know, whatever is the latest thing in the Plaza District or the Paseo. That's not gonna be at all of an interest to them. They use technology in very functional ways. They prefer traditional intellectual pursuits, things like going to museums, reading biographies is big on these people's lists. So they're gonna read lots of stuff on, you know, presidents and history and world history and things like that. And they like to buy proven products. And so they like proven, you know, like you said, Cattleman's, I think, is an excellent example. It's been there since 1920 something, and it's gonna probably be there, you know, for a long time. And so these are very tried and true and proven things. So that's a good place. I'm out of time. We'll finish with this and we'll finish talking about promotion next time. And we'll look at some more ads, hopefully. And I forgot to bring my phone, so I gotta make a note where we stop. If you got ducks, come and see me.
I would rather go to Web. I wouldn't pay that much money. I would rather go to Web.
Oh, no.
Which one?
I know, I'm trying to think.
The one with the J? Jenya, or whatever. Honestly, I like their advertising.
See, now you got three.
Advertisers are really good.
And then you got three.
Maybe not.
Five.
How many did you get, Adam? 3.
I knew it started with T. And I was like, I got three.
You're like, we can go to Zamachi. This one right up the street.
So that's.
You ever want to go? This one right up the
That's
street.
25.
And like our campus corner. Our campus corner, they have a Tamashi. It's the same, but it's like less vibey. You know?
Yeah.
I really like the
Yeah.
vibe of Tamashi. And I think that's what really like makes me go.
All right. It's during finals week. It's open. Yeah. Yeah, it's open now. I mean, yeah. I mean, they're always open.
Okay.
Martinez.
Yeah, how many did you get? 2,
Martinez.
55, got it,
Gracias.
thank you. Anybody else? Nope, alright.
Did we have an example 3, was that due in particular?
Yeah, I think it was due last week,
Was it?
or the week before, I'd have to look. I've kind of gotten